What is the paranormal? Was 9/11 actually predicted? Are UFOs actually real? To find out the answers to these questions, earlier we've interviewed our guest who is an author and has also spent 25 years in the FBI. But before we get to our studios, I would request all of you to like our YouTube channel, which is down below, because I'm Zain Khan and this is live. Welcome to Zain Khan Live, where everything is discussed. Welcome to our show, John Desouza. It's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, son. Very nice to be here with you. I'm very much looking forward to this.
John Desouza, let's get to our first question. You worked for the FBI for 25 years. You were in service when the 9/11 incident took place. How did that incident change your life, and how did that incident introduce you to the paranormal world?
Well, you know, when the 9/11 tragedy took place, what occurred was one of the most monumental events in paranormal and law enforcement that has ever been seen. What occurred was the incident that I refer to as the Indigo kids of 9/11. Where there were all these intelligence centers that were stood up with FBI agents and police, where we told people anything that could be connected to terrorism, anything at all, please call it into these centers, let us know. And these all had to be investigated right out to the end, no matter how small or insignificant the lead may seem to people. And so, yeah, we had to go out and do some interviews based on some very thin stuff sometimes. And one of the events that occurred over and over again, we had these dozens and dozens of events called in where little kids as young as like 6 years old, going all the way up to 12, dozens of these cases where these kids were called in. They were reported not by their parents but by caretakers as having prescient experiences of 9/11 just before 9/11 happened. And some of these they covered all kind of visions, dreams. We had one child, for instance, who was just doing a finger painting in his class, and the teacher came over to him and said, "Oh, wow, this finger painting is very beautiful. These two tall buildings appear to be glowing, and there appear to be these angels with red wings flying out of the buildings. Where are they flying to?" And the little boy said to the teacher, "Those buildings aren't glowing. They are actually on fire. And those are not angels, those are people jumping out of the buildings, and they are on fire also." And teacher walked away from a child like that, didn't think much more about it until 9/11 happened. And then she called that in. And that child, along with many others, I mean, there was another example is there was a little girl who was just sitting on the playground during recess, and she was just tracing figures in the dirt. And teacher's aide comes over to her and says to her, "Are you okay, sweetheart? What's happening? Are you all right?" And the little girl said, "I'm fine. I'm just thinking." And the teacher's assistant goes to walk away, and the little girl pulls on her skirt violently and says to her, "Tomorrow, stay away from tall buildings, because tall buildings sometimes fall down, and they fall on people." So, again, that's another example of one of those things that were once the teacher walks away from a child like that, doesn't think much more about it until 9/11 tragedy happens. Then the teacher calls that in, and those children had to be interviewed no matter what. And there were dozens and dozens of those cases, and that was a massive experience in law enforcement of the paranormal, because in each one of those cases, their backgrounds were checked, everything was investigated out to the end, and it was found that in every one of those cases, there was no connection to terrorism whatsoever on the part of this family. So these children didn't overhear somebody. They didn't get these impressions from adults in their area. And so the paranormal explanation was the only explanation left in every single one of these cases.
John, since we're on Zain Khan Live and there's no censorship and everything is discussed, speaking of the Indigo children, you were in service for 25 years in the FBI. Did it ever occur to you that you ever investigated a terror suspect or a criminal or a serial killer that wasn't normal, or you may have felt that that person was possessed by a paranormal entity?
Oh yes, absolutely, and that's something that I wrote about in my first book, The Para Investigators. I had experience with serial killers who were now in custody. One in particular, his name was Willie G. At least that's what I call him, Willie G. And he was an individual who explained to me how serial killers actually function. And he explained to me that yes, they do have linkage with spirits and with elder creatures, he would describe them as, that would help them, give them inspiration, give them abilities, paranormal abilities, far beyond that the regular people would ever have. And he explained to me exactly how serial killers work, how they charge a spiritual tax from their victims that give them energy and power to continue the things that they do. And that's why I wrote about him in my book, because he was a fascinating individual. And he actually tried to teach me methods that could be used to capture other serial killers, because he said that he himself would benefit from that capture and from getting other people who were involved in that sort of thing. So yeah, that was a very staggering experience that I had to write about, because it was quite amazing. And he says that he told me that serial killers are much more ubiquitous than anyone would ever imagine, because of these truths that he revealed to me about them.
John Desouza, let's move on to our next topic. Being in service in the FBI for 25 years, you might have a lot of research on many classified and also declassified subjects. Could you tell us a few prominent, obviously declassified instances where a majority of people witnessed UFOs with their own eyes?
Yes, there are so many of them. And yeah, a lot of them are declassified partly because they probably never should have been classified in the first place. But wherever I go, I always invite people to go online to the repository of all declassified FBI cases, which include numerous UFO investigations. And people can go check for themselves. They can download documents for themselves. They're free, absolutely free. And it is at vault, the word vault.fbi.gov, vault.fbi.gov. And you just go to there, and then on the right side, there's a large section that says unexplained phenomena. And you click on that, and then you have cattle mutilation investigations. You have many groups of UFO investigations. And there's many subheadings for that. And you can go to the first group of UFO investigations, and you click on that, and you'll come up to the first group of UFO investigation, and that contains the HODL memo, contains numerous instances where the FBI talks about and admits to the existence of UFOs and to their presence. And the Roswell investigation is there. It's spoken of there in that group of events. And you can actually download the documents and look at them for yourselves. And it's very easy to get. On page 22 of that first group of documents. There's a document called the Memorandum of Importance, which is an FBI agent that reveals he's been in contact. He has an informant who is an alien visitor, and who tells him why alien visitors are on Earth, how they're getting here, and what the reason is that they're getting here. And again, that's on page 22 of the first group. But there are so many of these instances where numerous people have observed FBI have observed UFOs, both on the ground, military and civilian personnel. And of course, the most famous one globally is 1952 Washington, D.C. invasion, which is documented extensively in the Roberts Commission reports, which is, there was, in 1952, there was a wave, an invasion of UFOs over the Capitol building of Washington, D.C., and the monument buildings, right? And some of the most protected airspace in the United States. And this was phenomenal because, and BBC did an excellent documentary on this, where they actually have video of the first wave coming in over the Capitol building of the United States in Washington, D.C. And they're just lit up. They're just these UFOs that appear like plasmas filled with light, and they just come in, and it's at night. It was the first wave. And this, however, it wasn't the only wave, because this invasion continued for nearly 14 days, and it was the only, and there were hundreds of witnesses, civilian and military witnesses, who captured this event on radar, on sonar, on in written reports, on video. It was undeniable, in other words. And it went on for 14 days. And it was the first and only time in the Western world, the only time, that an entire Air Force was sent after UFOs. And it was a catastrophe. This is why it never happened again, because it was a catastrophe and an embarrassment, because all of those jets that went after those UFOs were humiliated by face-to-face encounters, overs and unders, loops. They were doing loops around our jets. It was a tremendous embarrassment because these UFOs handled these jets like they were little children. It was terrible embarrassment. And they made it clear they could have easily destroyed every single one of those jets, but they didn't. But the lesson learned there was that never again in the Western world has anyone sent out their entire Air Force against UFOs. They'll send one or two jets, yeah, but not in mass ever again, because that was a very embarrassing event. And anybody wants to find out about it, the Roberts Commission reports are available. You can see, because they admit everything that happened, the embarrassing nature of the confrontations, and that's why that has not happened ever again since then.
John Desouza, as you've answered in the last question, but I really want you to elaborate on this subject a little more. I was interviewing Nick Pope, who worked for the British Ministry of Defense. I asked him if he could tell me some declassified, documented instances where a British fighter jet or any fighter jet ever came face to face with a UFO. And he told me that there was this incident when an aircraft did come in contact with a UFO, and the aircraft was jammed, and they couldn't, attack the UFO. The buttons were jammed in the aircraft. You being in service for 25 years in the FBI, do you know of any more instances where any aircraft was jammed while trying to attack a UFO or come close to a UFO? You have mentioned this in your last question, but I would really want you to make us understand a little bit more on this subject, and also tell us what is the nature, what were the nature of these UFOs?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are so many of those types of close encounters between aircraft and UFOs that are obviously otherworldly. They don't appear to be extraterrestrial. They appear to be extraterrestrial because of the technology that they have available to them. In Guernsey, in United Kingdom in 2007, there were two two airliners that just about the same time encountered the same, it was like a mile long, cigar-shaped object that was standing perfectly still in the sky. It was not moving. It was yellow. It had green areas to it, but it was immense. I mean, it was immense, much larger than any airliner, and it was just frozen there. So one pilot observed it from about 40 miles away. Another one was closer, but they both saw the same thing, and they observed it. And it was it was directly beneath his plane, and it was just there, just floating off the coast of Alderney. And it was something where their instruments weren't jammed. Their instruments were working perfectly well. And they knew that what they were seeing, they were really seeing. But there's many, many instances like that. And I wrote a book, The Extra-Dimensionals, in which I talk about what's often more likely than jamming the instruments of airliners and aircraft and military aircraft, is that for some reason pilots don't have a feeling that they want to fire at these UFOs, that they want to take hostile action against them. Same thing is true with people on the ground. We have these enormous black triangles that appear over the cities in the States. They appear over the cities. And these black triangles can be, and there's so many instances of these things happening. In 2008, there were dozens of people in Texas, in towns called Stephenville and Dublin, Texas, where police officers especially saw this enormous black triangle. And we're talking about, a mile or two from wingtip to wingtip, just traveling slowly over these towns. And for some reason, these officers don't have the feeling, the thought, the instinct that they should not take hostile action, that they shouldn't shoot at it, shouldn't point their guns at these things. And in my book, The Extra-Dimensionals, I examine this phenomena. It's a weird psychological phenomena, and it appears to me that whereas we believe in force fields, it appears to be some kind of a dissuasion field that's being used, so that the thought of hostile action never really appears in the minds of these people. And I think that's something that appears more consistent as I investigate these cases, so many of these cases across the time spans, that it appears there is a sort of a dissuasion field that appears to be used against anyone that is observing these craft. And so that they never originate the thought of shooting at or taking hostile action against these UFOs. And that may be one reason why there's never been a documented case, despite so many sightings over the last 10, 20 years of these giant black triangles. There's never been a documented case of someone shooting at one of these cases, one of these vehicles. Even though they're low, they travel slowly and low over populated areas.
Okay, John, you being a researcher on the subject, and this is one of my favorite questions, because as a child, I've always wondered about the Roswell, case. Could you tell us what really happened at Roswell? Why did the government cover it up?
The government covered up Roswell because they had to, because they were ordered to, because that was what they were told to do. And ultimately, governments, what they do is they follow orders. And it occurs to me that Roswell and many incidents after it show that there is a power that is above the nations, that gives them orders on what to do. And I call them the elite powers in control, EPIC. And they believe they're in control of basically all the nations. And they tell them what to do and where to step. And you see things like that because the cover-up of something like Roswell is immediate. And they don't have to wait for orders because there's a standing order that has gone out to all the nations that you will keep hidden anything real in regards to UFOs, real UFOs, and alien visitors that they know are visiting the planet on a regular basis. So because of that, they initiate these cover-ups. I mean, we see it much later than Roswell was covered up, and that cover-up was undone during the 80s. And then also in the 80s, of course, we see the Rendlesham Forest affair, where we have several UFOs that invaded a military base, which was an American military base on British soil. And over three nights, we had these UFOs that invaded this American military base, being chased around by U.S. soldiers on the ground, who were terrified, by the way, because these things were traveling through the forest at night, and some of them were low on the ground, bumping into trees, appearing to be sort of like wounded animals, filled with light but leaking light. And these young soldiers, were terrified, having to chase these UFOs through the area. But the thing that we saw in 1980 in Rendlesham is that two governments, the United States and UK government, immediately, they didn't have to wait for orders, there's a standing order, immediately initiated cover-up of what occurred. They immediately began interviewing the soldiers, telling the soldiers they were not to speak of this, making them sign non-disclosures, intimidating even the colonel of the base, Colonel Halt, into silence, not to talk about this sort of thing, not to give any impressions whatsoever. And then some of the evidence from Rendlesham, what happened at Rendlesham, disappeared as well. And that cover-up has been enforced ever since, just like what we saw with Roswell. So that's where the cover-up is coming from, not from any prime minister or any president. That's temporary leadership. The cover-up comes from for higher than the prime ministers and the presidents. And that is and that order for cover-up, for keeping this information quiet, comes from much higher and continues to be enforced, at least until now.
Okay, but I have a question. Do you think that the world governments are keeping UFO sightings a secret? And if you think that the answer is yes, then why are they doing that?
Yes, world governments are definitely keeping UFO sightings a secret. They try to cover them up as much as possible. They deny their pilots the ability to talk about them, and they do take whatever steps are needed. And the reason they do that is because they must, because they have been ordered since 1947, since Roswell. There has been a worldwide order, and it's a gag order that has gone out to all the world governments that they must keep these UFO sightings secret and covered up as much as possible. I mean, sometimes the video gets out and you can't do much more than that, but they are under that permanent order to keep quiet about these things and keep quiet about alien visitors. So there's lots of data out there. The governments have lots of data, but they cannot speak of the agenda of what is really behind this, and they cannot speak about what's really happening with these UFO sightings. And that's the way it's always been until very recently.
Mr. John Desouza, let's get to the last question. A few months back, I was reading an article that there was a program at the Pentagon which studied UFOs, and they declassified the information. Could you please describe what that program was, what they were trying to gain from that UFO study program? What sort of information were they trying to gain from it? And also tell us, are they still continuing that UFO program at the Pentagon?
Well, apparently there was a program to study UFOs as unknown aerial phenomena and possibly unknown aerial threats. And that was going on for several years. The program ostensibly was closed down or canceled in 2012, supposedly. So that was supposedly is not going on anymore. The thing that they did do, apparently, though, they did collect quite a bit of information. And now we all see that there's been some kind of a change, some kind of an extraordinary change, because now we see that this Pentagon Nimitz UFO video has been released, and the pilot, even the United States Air Force pilot that was involved, is talking about it. The Pentagon and mainstream news is talking about it, showing the video, and so something has changed from that system that we just talked about of cover-up, of constant and ubiquitous cover-up that has been going on in the past. Things are being revealed now. And this Pentagon video, this Nimitz Pentagon video, I believe it was filmed in 2011. And it is the video that shows the Nimitz pilot, the pilot that is locked on to this single UFO. And the reason we know that UFO, and you should show this video so that we know what we're talking about, it's the reason that it's very significant is because you see an object that is in the sights of this pilot, and it has no means of physical thrust. In other words, this video would show jets coming out of it. If any propulsion that was visible, it would be visible on this film. There is none. So that means the technology that's being used is something different. It was traveling at an extraordinary speed. The pilot immediately asks, is this a drone? Because drones have rotors that actually help them to travel, but not at this speed. The speed would not be possible to achieve with the rotors that this object is maintaining. It's an extraordinary speed at the level of a jet. And so it appears that this is a genuine UFO that is employing technology beyond anything that we have. And so the real story is not the UFO video itself. The real story is why now suddenly is mainstream media, New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, American media, which is normally so controlled. We have the most controlled media in the world. It does not reveal. It certainly doesn't reveal things like UFOs. And so, something has changed, and the question is, what has changed to allow mainstream media in the United States to talk about these issues, and the Pentagon to actually reveal a genuine UFO video, which is what apparently which is what's happening here. And the question is, why? What has changed? And obviously what's changed is orders from the top have changed, because this sort of thing has always been strictly controlled and covered up. And now it's being revealed by the same institutions that were enforcing a cover-up before. So I think we're being prepared for something. I think something is definitely coming that we are being prepared for at this time.
Thank you so much, John Desouza, for being on our show. It's a pleasure having you.
Oh, thank you so much, Zain. It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
This was John Desouza, an author and also somebody who spent 25 years in the FBI. We were discussing the paranormal and also the reality of UFOs. Before we leave, I would like to request you to like our YouTube channel, which is down below, because I'm Zain Khan and this is live.